Welcome to the Ultimate You podcast, and we have an amazing guy who I've been so excited for years to talk to. He's here with us today, and Joel, I'll let you take it away and get us into today's show.
Well, you made a great investment of your time to be here. And one of the things that you need to think of is, why do you come to a podcast like this? You know, the Ultimate You podcast. Well, one of the reasons is you want to get better at what you're doing. And our theme, of course, is my part is using speaking to grow your business. And Robbie's part is the fitness, the health, and the wellness part. And as a result, you're going to be even better. So have you ever watched something just grow? Maybe you planted a seed in the ground and that seed turned into a tree or a plant or a flower. Or maybe you got a puppy, just a couple of weeks old, little tiny puppy, and then you've watched it grow into a well-trained, mature dog. Or maybe you had a business that you started, it wasn't doing very well in the beginning, and now it's become extremely successful. Or maybe you're a mom or a dad, and you might have had that day when your child was born and you saw it for the first time. And now years later, you watch that little baby turn into a boy or a girl, and then a woman or a man, and you've seen that development. So most likely, you have seen growth of some kind in your own life. Now, once you do, you become convinced of the power of improvement, growth and development. So I want you to come back in time to a Friday afternoon, 2:30, January 14th, 2011, over 10 years ago. You drive up to an address on 74th Street in Scottsdale, you knock on the door, and I open the door and let you in because you're coming into my home. And I ushered you into our large family room, and you sit down, and there are 13 other people there to listen to a college senior give his first motivational speech to business people and adults. The first thing you notice is his smile. And then as you listen to him talk, his loving, caring bearing that just drew everybody into his stories and the points that he was making. This young man was Anthony Robles. And at that time, he was a senior at Arizona State University. He was competing in the wrestling area for ASU and getting ready for the Nationals 3 months down the road, where he was going to hopefully compete. That was going to be in March. So along with these other guests, after you hear Anthony talk, I had requested that you give written feedback. And what could he have done to improve that message? Well, Anthony took those notes, studied them over, and 4 days later, he gave almost the same presentation with all those tweaks to the Kiwanis Club in Tempe, Arizona. The next week, he was at the Rotary Club in Phoenix. Now, this was a very special Rotary Club, which made up of senators, mayors, high-profile business executives, very successful people. And he blew them away. That was the beginning of one of the most amazing speaking careers I have ever seen in my 47 years as a Hall of Fame professional speaker. And one of my coaching clients, since I coach people on speaking, hired me to coach this young man because he wanted to be a speaker too. But once I got to know Anthony and was so taken by his wonderful gift, I returned the money. I never took a cent from any of the money Anthony earned or anybody paid me because this kid was special. Now, he had been working at a job at $10 an hour, but once I started working with him, I was able to get him speaking engagements, paying him $500 an hour. And then when he graduated from ASU and he became a professional now, Gary Lewis became his manager. And he turned that $500 fee into $5,000 and then $10,000 and even more, and also turned it into a contract on television with ESPN. It turned into a movie deal with a Hollywood superstar, which you'll hear more about. It got him on the Tonight Show 2 different times, a star of the ESPYs for a special award, and it turned into a best-selling book titled Unstoppable. And that word became Anthony's brand. And that day in my living room, as my wife Judy heard his presentation, we didn't really have a title at that time. And she said, that should be the title of his talk. And now let's flip the switch. Go to the fitness area of this podcast for you as you listen. And just in case you never heard of Anthony Robles or what he's accomplished between March 17th and March 19th of 2011 at the NCAA National Championship, which has never been done in history. But instead of me telling you what happened, I'm going to let the star of the show share it with you. So, Anthony, take us back to the beginning when your mom, also named Judy, was 16 years old when you were born, and she sees you for the first time. Tell our listener what the doctor says. And before you do, let me say how pleased again we are for you to share your story and your wisdom. So what did Mom hear that day?
Well, first of all, Mr. Weldon, Robbie, thank you guys so much for having me today. It's truly an honor to share my story and catch up with you. And my mom, the way she tells it to me, when I was born, the doctors immediately, they rushed me out of the operating room. Initially, she wasn't even allowed to see me. And when the head doctor finally came back into the room, he said, there's a problem. Your son was born missing his right leg. And they couldn't explain it to her. But immediately that doctor was basically going down the list of all the things that I wouldn't be able to do in my life, all the things that I would have a hard time with, and basically setting the bar low for me. He told my mom that she would basically be taking care of me the rest of my life. And luckily I was blessed with an amazing mother who didn't accept that as an answer. She wanted me to define what I was capable of. And she raised me in a way to where I tell people I felt like I was raised with my head in the clouds. I believed I could do anything. I believed that I was Superman. And of course, I was aware that I was born missing a leg. But the way my mom taught me and the way she raised me, we saw this as a challenge. We saw this as something I would have to learn to overcome. And she taught me to never allow this challenge to become my excuse, to be that reason to say I couldn't do it. It was too hard because I was missing a leg. And so that was my mentality growing up. It was never a matter of I can't do things. It was a matter of how can I do it? What do I need to do differently in order to get the job done, in order to reach my goal? And that's where Unstoppable came from, was my mother just having that mindset and putting that mindset in my head of I can do anything I set my mind to.
Well, I know that story, but when you think about that, as you're listening to this podcast, what excuses have you used? I'm sure you probably have both your legs. Now, you might have other challenges, but do you have that unstoppable mindset that Judy instilled in Anthony from the day he was born? He thought about what he could do, not what he can't do. And that's what you've got to be thinking about in your own life. Not that you've got to get along with one leg, but what challenges do you have or limitations are you imposing on yourself? Okay, so now tell them about the bike ride. That's such a great example.
Yeah, so I remember I was about 5, 6 years old, and my mom got me a bike for my birthday. And pretty much the rest of my family, they were like looking at her like, what are you doing? He's got one leg. How is he gonna be able to do this? But my mom said, you know what, we're gonna figure it out. So one day she actually took me outside and we started off in the grass. And I remember she put all these pads on me. I looked like a hockey goalie on the bicycle. And I practiced on the grass first. I fell a couple of times. My mom would pick me back up and she'd say, try this. Let's try this instead. And little by little, I started to develop my confidence. I developed that balance to where by the end of the day, I was riding down the street on my own with these huge hockey pads on, but it was a goal accomplished. And again, it just went back to just figuring things out, just figuring out a way to get my goal and just reach what I was searching for. And I believe that, we all wrestle with something is what I say. We all wrestle with the challenge. We all wrestle with obstacles, and it's not about the obstacle. It's about how you choose to approach it. And you have to decide, how am I going to react? I need to figure out what my strengths are, figure out what I can do, and attack my problem, wrestle my problem into submission.
Well, that mindset works great. And now Robbie, of course, played football in high school, and you played football before you got into wrestling. And so share with our listener how you got into wrestling and the tremendous record you had your first 2 years on the wrestling team, because that's legendary.
Well, yeah, initially I did play football. I played tackle football, but as a freshman in high school, I only weighed 90 pounds. So they had me as a defensive lineman. So I learned really quickly that really football was going to be pretty tough on the line. And so I started looking for other options. And it was actually an older cousin of mine, Jesse, who was a wrestler. He was about 3 years older than me. And I just remember he grew up in Tucson. And so we would catch up on the phone. He'd always tell me, he said, you should try wrestling. I think you'd be really good at it. Just give it a shot. And I always kind of pushed it away. I said, no, I'm a football player. This is what I want to do. But one day Jesse invited me to go to wrestling practice. And I'd never been to a practice before. I'd never seen a wrestling match. I said, you know what? I'm just going to go with him. I'm going to check it out. And so I just remember going to this wrestling practice, and I'm on the side of the mat. I'm just lifting weights, and I'm watching these guys go through their drills, their throws, their takedowns. And it's like, oh, this is pretty neat. This is pretty interesting. And I just remember his coach coming up to me. He says, hey, our lightweight, our 103 pounder needs someone to wrestle with today. Would you be willing to spar with them? And I looked at the coach. I said, no, thank you, coach. I'm okay. I just want to sit here and watch. And so coach said, okay. He walks away. And my cousin comes up. He says, hey, just try it out. He says, if you don't like it, I'll never bother you about wrestling again. You never have to do it again, but just try it. I really think you're going to love this. And so I went out there on that wrestling mat just to get my cousin off my back. And I remember I got thrown around, but I fell in love with the sport. I mean, I literally got thrown around. I got beat up pretty good. And I walked away. My shirt's all stretched out. There's blood all over me, but I had the biggest smile on my face because I felt like wrestling was the calling for my life. And so my first year wrestling, it was very legendary and unforgettable. I actually finished last place in the Mesa City tournament. I went to Mesa Junior High my freshman year, and I only won about 3 matches that first season. I was last place, but it was very discouraging. And I remember just putting all the work in and not seeing the results that I wanted to, but I still had that thought in the back of my head that this is what I was meant to do. This is the calling for my life. And again, it went back to just figuring it out. And I sat there and then said, okay, what do I need to do differently to accomplish my goal? How can I be a successful wrestler? And I was just blessed with a great support system around me who helped me to figure that out.
Well, as you listen to this, if that was you, I mean, you weigh in 90 pounds. Now, you might not know that much about wrestling. Now, until I met Anthony 10 years ago, I didn't know anything about wrestling. But since Anthony came into our life, both my grandsons wrestled in high school and college because of Anthony's unique impact on people. But one of the things that I learned is wrestling starts early, that the wrestlers of today are not starting at a freshman in high school. They have been wrestling for years now, and it's become so popular that 4 and 5 year olds are really into this. He's 10 years behind the curve. So looking at those first 2 years, what would you guess would happen the next 2 years? Well, I'm going to give you the answer, and then Anthony's going to tell you how he did it. In his junior and senior year at Mesa High School, and check me if I'm right on this, you went 96-0. 96 wins, no losses, and became the Arizona State champ at your weight class. Is that right, Anthony?
Yes, sir. I'm happy to say you're correct on that. And it was quite a bit of a jump. And like you mentioned, the experience gap between myself and my opponents, it was pretty wide. They had been wrestling since they were very young. But you know what? My approach was I need to figure out what my strengths are. And that's what our strategy was. We said, we're going to focus on your strengths and camouflage your weaknesses. And because I was born missing my leg, I've been on crutches my entire life. And what we decided was my upper body, that's going to be my strength in wrestling. I need to force my opponents to attack where I'm strong, to try to grab hold of me. And so we tweaked the style to where it was basically something that no one had ever seen before. It was very unique to me and my missing the leg. And little by little, I would basically go out on a wrestling mat with something new in my arsenal, some new tool that I could go out there and try. And after the match, whether I won or I lost, I'd go back to my coaches and we'd continue that feedback. We'd write down, okay, you know what, this is working, this isn't working. How can we adjust? How can we tweak this? And little by little, it started to come together to where by my senior year, I was 96-0. But it did take a long time. I wish I could say it happened overnight. It didn't. But I learned little by little that the progress was coming. Right? I could see the results little by little as I was improving, as I was growing. And I just knew I had to be patient, continue to put the time in, continue to work hard, and the results would take care of itself. And I was blessed to say that they did. They came together at the very end there.
How much before we go any further, Robbie, are we getting some feedback at your end?
No, my end sounds great. How's yours, Anthony?
Mine's fine.
I'm hearing kind of a background on Anthony's, but as long as our listener is not hearing it, then that's fine. All right, Robbie, you wanted to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, Anthony, what did you do? So you started as a sophomore.
A freshman.
You started as a freshman, and then the next 2 years?
No, junior, senior year.
Okay, so freshman was got last place in the Mesa tournament, and then what happened sophomore?
So sophomore year, I finished 6th place in the state. And I finished 6th place, and I was still wrestling the 103-pound weight class. I was lighter than everybody still, but my style really started to develop that year. And basically, the way I was able to make that jump from last place to 6th in the state, I trained all summer long. I mean, I was in the wrestling room Monday through Friday. Saturdays and Sundays, I was either in the weight room or I was running on the track, just getting my conditioning in. And so I was putting in that time and just paying the price, and it came together. But that was something that I learned from my wrestling coaches and from a great teammate of mine by the name of Chris Friege. I learned what it was going to take to be a champion. And I needed to pay the price every single day, and I needed to be willing to grind. That's what we would say on our wrestling team. You grind now, you shine later. And the grind was the hard work. It was the going in there in the weight room every single day when I didn't want to, but I needed to do that in order to reach the goal that I wanted to reach. And the price was I was willing to pay it every single day, because standing on the top of that podium by my senior year, when things officially came together, it was so special. And I just remember looking back at all the effort and those days I would put in the wrestling room and thinking, I would have done this 100 times over.
Now imagine if that was you, whatever your challenge is right now, that if you could turn your weakness into a strength. And you mentioned about developing your strengths and not focusing on your weaknesses, your upper body, and doing that. And then I remember the part about Chris Friege that he told you when you first started, in effect, listening to him and he began mentoring you, that whatever the coach tells you to do, you got to do double, right? If he tells you 40, you do 80. If he says run this, you got to do twice as much as anybody else. And then you said, why? Because if you want to be a champion, you can't do what everybody else was doing. And I think your whole, and as you listen to this, I've got to pull a lot of this out of Anthony, because he is so modest. And I think that's one of the things that audiences just love about him, is that he doesn't want to brag about himself, because he knows the message. And this podcast is for you. It's already helped Anthony. I know the story. Robbie knows the story, but you don't know the story and the rest of the story that you'll hear. So I think that that's such an important part, that you can't do ordinary if you want to be extraordinary. And Chris Friege really was the one that planted that, correct, Anthony, in your mind?
He absolutely was. And Chris, he was a state champion. He was the captain of our wrestling team. And I just remember going up to Chris and asking him for help, asking him to train me to reach his level of what I call greatness. And I remember he kind of sized me up and he looked me up and down and said, well, he says, if you're willing to put the work in, I'm there with you. He says, absolutely. And I learned from Chris exactly what you said, Mr. Weldon, is that, you know what, in order to reach that greatness, in order to become a champion, I couldn't be doing just the bare minimum. I couldn't be doing just what was asked of me, because if I did average, then I would get back average. If I wanted to be great, then I needed to put in the price. I needed to pay that price to be great. And I learned that from Chris. And so every day it wasn't fun, but every day after practice, we would be doing extra. We would be putting in extra sets in there. And I learned that that's what it was going to take to reach my greatness, is putting in the extra effort and really challenging myself to beat myself every single day. And that was something that I wasn't accustomed to. I didn't understand beforehand, but especially in wrestling, it's, when you get to a certain level, you feel like you can get comfortable. I've beaten everybody in my weight class. I've beaten all these other teams. I'm the best now. I can settle back. That's when you have to be training to beat yourself. That's when you say, you know what, how can I be better than I was yesterday? What can I do today to improve from yesterday? And that's what I learned from Chris. Every single day, I need to train to beat myself. I need to improve to be better than I was yesterday.
Oh, that's so powerful, Anthony. And as you're listening, just think about that. You're good at something, but that's when you've got to take over and get even better at it. And now, if I'm correct, so for the last 2 years, 96-0, you become the Arizona State champion. And then in your senior year, you win the national championship. Is that correct?
I did. I won the high school national championship, and I just remember going there, and it was basically invite only. So in order to be invited to the high school national championship, you had to either place first or second in your state to go. And so I was an Arizona State champion, and at that time, I hadn't really been recruited to colleges yet to wrestle for them. So we saw that as an opportunity to really showcase my talent at the national level. And so I went to this national tournament, and I was actually able to beat my opponent. I majored him, which is you beat your opponent by 8 points. And so I just remember walking away feeling very accomplished. It was a California state champion that I had to wrestle, a really tough opponent. But I remember walking away just so excited, thinking, okay, you know what, I have the results. I put the work in. Now it's time for the big goal. Now it's time to wrestle in college. All these guys that I watched on TV, I want to be there. I want to be on that championship wrestling mat and win an NCAA title. And so I started looking towards my next goal and my next mountain to climb, wrestling in college and being an NCAA champion.
And that's when the flood of requests from every major wrestling school came in offering you a full ride scholarship. Is that correct?
I was expecting that. I honestly thought I was going to be getting those offers left and right and that these colleges would be burning down the door to get me, but that was not the case. I just remember being really shocked because I didn't receive phone calls. I didn't receive emails. No schools were looking at me. And so I started to actually reach out to Division I programs. I was calling coaches and telling them, hey, I would love to wrestle for you. I'd send in my highlight reels of my wrestling footage, and the majority of them still would not respond to me. They didn't take the time to even tell me, no, we have the spot filled. We're sorry, we're out of scholarships, anything. They just ignored me. The very few who did, and I can count them on one hand, they told me two things. They said, number one, we believe you're 30 pounds too light to wrestle in college wrestling. And in wrestling, we're always having to watch our weight. And that's something that is part of the sport. We're always having to be disciplined with our weight because you have to weigh in exactly on your weight class. So for instance, I was a 125 pounder in college. That was my weight class, 125. If I weighed 125.1, if I was 1 ounce over, I would be disqualified. I wouldn't be allowed to wrestle. And so wrestlers are always watching that. A lot of wrestlers are dropping weight in college or losing about 10 pounds or so. So they said, you're 30 pounds too small to wrestle here. These guys are too strong for you. And the second thing they told me, they said, well, this is also Division I wrestling. These are the best wrestlers from across the country. We have 10 scholarships for a 33-man roster, and you're missing your leg. They said, we don't think you can compete at this level. We don't think it's possible for you to be successful here. So we cannot risk a scholarship on you. Unfortunately, we don't think it's possible. And that was the answer I received. And I just remember feeling very, very discouraged about that because I felt like, here I am, right? I'm putting in all this work. I have the results behind me. I feel like the finish line is right here. It's in my grasp, and I reach for it, and they're saying, no, you have to go further. That they moved that finish line back on me. And I was, to be honest, I was very upset about that.
Now let's fast forward 4 years. Let's put those same college coaches that turned you down on the phone. Yeah, this is Anthony Robles call. Oh, Anthony. I mean, talk about payback. I know that you're not a payback kind of guy, but when you get to the rest of this story, that's so amazing. And in the beginning, your first 2 years at ASU, you weren't a superstar at that point because everything those coaches told you was true. They were stronger, faster, and all these things that you didn't really have in high school. And I think if you've played any kind of competitive sports, the difference between college and high school is dramatic. And then when you get to the pro level in baseball, football, basketball, then that level goes even higher in the pros. And here's this kid with missing a leg at 125. And now tell them what happened those last 2 years at ASU.
Yeah, so my last 2 years at ASU, my junior year, I actually finished 7th place. I was an All-American. So my sophomore and my junior year, I was a 2-time All-American. But my senior year, I was actually going into that season, I was ranked top 3 in the country. And I made it all the way to the national championship. And it was pretty funny because I remember actually wrestling in that national tournament. And I believe it was in the quarterfinals. I'm wrestling my opponent and I ended up beating him. And so traditionally in wrestling, after you win a match, you go across the mat to shake the opposing coach's hand. And so I go over there and I remember shaking the opposing coach's hand. And it was actually a school that I'd wanted to wrestle for coming out of high school. And the coach says, congratulations. And he pulls me close and he just says in my ear, he's like, hey, he said, I made a big mistake not recruiting you out of high school, didn't I? And I looked at him, I smiled, I laughed. I was like, yeah, coach, you did. And he laughed and he said, hey, just keep it up. Great job. I'm proud of you. And it was just a very special moment to me, just to get recognized like that. But, fast forward to that finals match. I just remember I'm there and in front of 20,000 people, I had the opportunity to wrestle against the returning national champion who I had never faced before. And he also came from the number 1 school that I wanted to wrestle for coming out of high school. He was an Iowa Hawkeye. And for those of you who don't know wrestling, Iowa, top-notch wrestling program. They develop All-Americans and national champions like crazy. That's one of the programs where every high school wrestler wants to go. I mean, they're like the New England Patriots of wrestling. So I remember just wrestling my heroes against the returning champion. And I was very nervous about that match. I was very scared. And one of the things I would do is before a wrestling match, before we get called to the center, I would pace on my side of the mat. Just go back and forth, just pace, just to get my mind right, kind of flip that switch in order to go out there and take care of business. So I'm there trying to pump myself up, but I just remember just being so terrified. I mean, just thinking, I'm about to wrestle Iowa. I'm about to wrestle the national champ. I've been training for 9 years for this one moment. This one moment here, I don't want to mess that up. And I was looking at all my challenges, right? I was thinking about all the reasons why I was going to be tough. I was psyching myself out. Really, the way I think about it is I was preparing myself to lose. And I just remember being in this mindset, feeling so overwhelmed. But there was a special moment where as I'm looking up at all these people, and all these people are flashing their cameras and roaring, screaming super loud, I remember looking in one section. And I locked onto that section because up there, my mom was sitting with my siblings, my 3 brothers, my sister, and my high school coach was up there as well, along with Chris. They're up there just kind of sitting there cheering for me. And I just remember the noise just drowned out. I mean, I couldn't hear anything. Everything just went silent. My fear just went away. I just remember looking at all my loved ones, and I called them my voices in the crowd, that support system around me. And I said, I can do this. I'm unstoppable. I put all my work in for this moment. I can do this. I'm a champion. I just got to go out there and take care of business. And I went out there and wrestled that match. And honestly, it was one of the funnest matches I've ever wrestled. It was really neat just to hear the roar and still see the cameras flashing as I was wrestling and moving around against my opponent. But it was a very special experience for me.
Well, that I can remember watching that in our living room with a bunch of friends, crying like a baby. I'm crying right now when I remember watching that. So you win the national championship at 125, and with it, was I correct that about 400 wrestlers were involved in that tournament? And they have one other award that they give at the national championship.
Yes, sir. They do have one other award, and it's awarded at the very end once everybody's finished their matches and they've given out the individual awards. And this award is Outstanding Wrestler, and they give it to the basically the best wrestler of the tournament out of all the weight classes. And I'm honored to say that I received the Outstanding Wrestler award. And it's actually, you can see it over my shoulder over here. It's that wrestling trophy on my desk on the bottom part. And I just remember getting presented with that award. And again, it was just such an honor. I mean, that night was a dream for me. And to receive that award on top of my national title, it was the icing on the cake. Because looking back, when colleges didn't want to recruit me, when they weren't willing to give me an opportunity, when they said I couldn't excel at the Division I level and that it wasn't possible, to receive that award, it felt like I was finally getting acknowledged. I had finally reached my mountaintop, and the hard work had finally paid off. And it was a long journey, and there were so many times along the way where I felt discouraged because I wasn't seeing the results immediately like I wanted to. I was getting frustrated because it was just taking too long. But every single day in the back of my head, I would think about how good it was going to feel if I stayed, if I pressed on, if I continued to grind to receive that bracket. I imagined what it would feel like to be on that podium for them to hand that to me. And it was just a special experience because I thought back and said, it was all worth it. The blood, sweat, and tears that went into this, it was all worth it.
So, Anthony, between seasons, right? Between seasons, how much training did you do between seasons? Because most athletes, they get focused and they train their sport. But what is the difference between an amazing athlete? I'm going to go out on a limb here because I don't yet know the answer. But my guess is you have almost as much training between seasons, maybe a little different technique and training, that type of thing. What happened between seasons to make these kind of amazing world-class results happen?
To be honest with you, there really was no off season for me. I mean, freshman, sophomore, junior year, I trained all summer long, every single day. Again, I was mostly on the wrestling mat because for me, wrestling was my focus. Wrestling was what I wanted to be good at, to be successful in. And so I was on the wrestling mat, getting wrestling strong is what we would say, and learning my positions, improving, cleaning things up, watching film and just adjusting and really just continuing to build on my style. And that was something that I felt like I needed to do in order to catch up again, in order to be the best. That was a mentality that I had learned from Chris. We had to do extra. And so the summertime was my opportunity to do that extra, to beat everybody else, because the way I saw it during the season, everybody's working hard, right? Everybody's going as fast as they can. They're doing their best. So we're basically just trying to keep up with each other at that pace. In the off season, if you call it an off season, that's when people take a break, right? That's when people want to relax and they get lazy and they start eating the junk food. But for me, that was my opportunity. There was no off season. That's when I was able to jump in front of my competition. And so from my freshman year up until my junior year, I did train all summer long. But it was actually pretty unique because from my junior to my senior year, the wrestling room, I took that off. I didn't train in the wrestling room because I needed some time just to recharge mentally from the sport. I was still exercising, I was still working out, but I didn't step on a wrestling mat. And I think that was just a great choice for me to make at the time, because wrestling, it's a very grueling sport, physically and mentally demanding. And there are some issues that I had off the mat, some challenges I was dealing with in my life that I needed some time to overcome, to conquer. And so coming back my senior year, I just felt refreshed. I felt recharged and I gave it my best and it all worked out. But the off season, that's when you have the time to do the extra. And for me, there was no off season.
Yeah. Sharpening the saw, right?
So as you're listening, do you want to be ordinary or extraordinary? I mean, that's the bottom line. That's what this whole podcast is about. If you want to be extraordinary, Anthony's giving you the keys to the kingdom. You got to do more than anybody else. There is no off season. That's it. And, talk about getting stronger. I believe while you were still a senior, now, Robbie can tell you as a listener what the numbers really are when it comes to bench pressing, what the average person could bench press and what Anthony ended up bench pressing. Am I correct that it was 305?
Yes, sir. It was 305 in college. That was my max
in college. Yeah. At 125. Now, yeah. Robbie, equate that to what's going on in every gym in America right now with a 200-pound guy who's in pretty good shape, that's got guns for his biceps. What's he going to bench press? Average workout guy that's
for 200, for an average workout guy at 200 pounds, yeah. maybe like 225, 200, maybe his body weight, an average guy at around 200. You start getting into the more higher percentage, you're going to start seeing 300s, 350s, really amazing is going to start being double body weight. But with Anthony, we're looking at, we're getting towards that 3X mark, and that is world-class level weight to strength ratio. That's amazing. Anthony, how many pull-ups were you able to do?
Well, let's before Anthony answers that, one thing that he said is you have to keep setting new goals too. So now, this is 10 years ago, everything you've heard so far. Anthony is still in magnificent physical condition. Now, he is an announcer for ESPN and does the national championship behind the microphone now, talking about the kids coming up after him. And then recently, and he's got a lot of connections in pro sports, at a halftime game, at an NFL game, Anthony entered the Guinness Book of Records. So now, based on Robbie's question, how did you get in the Guinness Book of Records?
Well, and it goes back to what I said earlier about always trying to beat myself, right? And I try to apply that to every aspect of my life, and whether it's in my speaking, with commentating, wrestling, everything physically. And so after I got done competing in wrestling, I was looking for that next big goal physically, the next thing to challenge me. And I started looking at these Guinness records for pull-ups. And the first one I saw, it was actually a friend of mine. He tagged me in a Facebook video. It was at the time, it was the current Guinness record holder for most pull-ups in a minute. And that record, I believe it was 60 at the time. And so I started training for a full year. I ended up beating it. I did 62. It was at a New York Jets game in November. I just remember it being really cold out. I think it was like 40 degrees. And I'm jumping up on this bar. There's about 80,000 people there in this huge arena. And I just remember, I'm banging out these pull-ups and I get to 50. And that was my mental, my stopping point. At 50, I knew I had a second to jump off the bar, try to shake off the lactic acid as quick as I could, take a deep breath, jump back on the bar, and then take it home to beat the record. So I jump off at 50. I just remember taking this deep breath in. My arms are just super numb and hearing the roar of the crowd. I mean, I'm there. I'm overlooking 80,000 people. I'm looking at this huge football field, and I just remember them screaming, and that gave me the adrenaline I needed to take it home. And I remember jumping back on the bar. I actually lost track mentally of what number I was at. And so I'm on this bar and I start panicking. Like, I have no idea where I'm at. And so I just went until they told me to stop. And honestly, I jumped off the bar. My lungs were like on fire. And my girlfriend just came and gave me a big hug. My fiance now, but at the time she's just my girlfriend. And she gives me this huge hug. And I asked her, I was like, did I break the record? How many did I do? I'm not sure if I did it or not. She's like, yeah, you beat it by a couple. You beat it by 2, I think. And that was just another dream, another amazing accomplishment. But I haven't stopped there. I'm looking to do more challenges. I'm actually pursuing the most pull-ups in 24 hours. That's my next big record attempt, which will be next month in September. I believe it's September 25th. The current record, it's 7,715. And it's very intimidating. But again, I approach it like everything else. I approach it with a mindset of how can I do this? What do I need to do to get the job done? And I just break it down. And I know this is going to be something it's going to test me mentally and physically, but I'm excited for that test. I'm excited to see what I'm made of, because really you don't know what your true strengths are until you push to that comfort zone, push through the comfort zone until you get to your edge. And then once you get there, that's where the growth happens, right? It's on the other side of that comfort zone. It's on the other side when you're willing to step over the edge. And you can say, okay, you know what? I can go a little bit further than I thought. I can go a little bit further now, a little bit more. And I'm just constantly trying to grow and push myself. And that's what it's all about every single day. I beat myself and I try to improve.
Wow. Well, Robbie, just to put in perspective what Anthony said, since you've trained so many world-class athletes in their own sports, what does the average person do in pull-ups?
Oh, an average workout person, a male? Maybe like an average maybe like 6 or 7, an average workout person, that's working out, that's worked out for years. They're not super gung ho, but they're not only doing yoga and stuff. They do work out. It's probably about 6 or 7, because on the heavyweight side, they're not able to do as many. And some lighter people are doing like 12 and stuff. But,
what was your best ever? What was your best?
Well, I was pretty proud of my best until I started talking to Anthony. and that's the thing. Hey, we're going to make Anthony look even better, right? Because my numbers were amazing. But then you look at Anthony, it's like, oh, my goodness. All right. So at 205 pounds, when I was into like performance was the thing. At 205 pounds, I did 3 sets of 30 over 30 with only a 60-second break in between. So I did 33, 32, 31 with a 60-second break in between those sets. And that's, if you can do over 30 pull-ups, that's amazing, right? Anthony's, it's a Guinness Book World Record. It's the #1 guy in the world doing pull-ups. I mean, but yeah, so I did 3 sets over 30. I was proud of that until today, and now I might have to go back to the drawing board.
So I shouldn't really set up a competition for the 24-hour for the 7,000 that he's going to beat again. All right, well, I'm going to let you do that by yourself, Anthony. Well, obviously, you're listening to this podcast not to do pull-ups, not to become a national championship wrestler, but how do you overcome the challenges in your life? And if you listen to all these truths, these simple, powerful truths that Anthony has given you, you've got a real formula there. And I think you could also catch one of the other things, his smile and his inner joy. There's just such a unique thing. And that's what I saw in you, Anthony, 10 and a half years ago when I first met you at that coffee shop at ASU, when my client wanted me to coach you. And I had my whole presentation prepared to tell him, forget it. We don't need another motivational speaker in the world today. So many problems in the speaking industry in 2011. Forget it. Go to school, get a job. And then on weekends, you can go talk to kids if you want. And the minute I met him, it was just life-changing for me as well to see somebody that had this challenge to overcome, that would have beaten almost anybody, to take it to the level, aside from the physical things you've heard, but his mental mindset. And all the time I spent with him, because we did almost 50 talks together in that time to get you paid. And all my clients, many of them sponsored him and paid for talks. So every time he went out, he got paid, and that was all done through the NCAA compliance officer at ASU to make sure I never did anything that would violate his amateur status. But his joy never stopped. And the most significant thing was how much time he would spend with these kids. When he talked at a school program, which we went to so many, and he spoke for my grandkids' school, and my grandson introduced him at that one, he would spend hours afterwards signing autographs, signing shoes and hats and T-shirts. And I can never forget at Tempe High School. Do you remember that talk at Tempe High School with the cops lined up on the side of the wall? And I asked the principal who was sitting next to me, because I introduced him at that meeting, I said, what are all the cops here for? He said, well, it's Assembly Day. They're always here because we have such terrible fights. And, and a wrestler coming in, I don't know what's going to happen today, so we got extra officers here. And when he started to speak, there was not a sound in that auditorium. It was packed. It was standing room only. And then, do you remember this one kid asked this question? Because the audience was made up of mostly Black or Hispanic kids, low income, struggling, difficult. And this one guy raises his hand. I got a question for you, Anthony Sponson. What's your question? Are you black or brown? and he says, well, I'm both. And the place went crazy. And they cheered and laughed. And I left after 2 hours after he talked, signing autographs, because I had another appointment. And I couldn't even, just think about this. I couldn't even drive him in my car. He had to get to his places because that would violate an NCAA rule that had given him transportation. So I had to leave, and I'm getting into my truck in the parking lot, and this girl is crying. And I thought something happened. I went over to her. I said, what happened? She said, I just heard this speaker in there. I said, oh, you mean Anthony? Oh, yeah. Why are you crying? She said, I thought I couldn't do anything with my life. And now I can. And that was the impact that you had on people. And I've been doing this a long time. And I'm absolutely sure I have never seen anyone have the kind of impact on an audience that you had. And this was before, Robbie, he had won the national championship. This is before he had all of the acclaim that came with that championship. But just who he was and what he said had that impact on kids. And when I saw that girl leave, stop crying and start smiling because she knew now her life could be worth something, I thought, how many people ever even have that impact on one person in their whole life? And here's a kid that's going to do it for thousands of people. And you're doing it on this podcast. Because I know I can just tell listening to Robbie, Robbie's been my trainer for 20 years. I probably spend more time with Robbie than they spend with my family. But just sensing, what he sees in you too. And as you're watching this podcast or listening to this, that's what you need to think of. How do you come across to others? How can you help others with your story? So, Anthony, I just can't congratulate you enough for what you've done in such a positive way. And now I hate to put you on the spot because this might sound like bragging, but you're the only person I've ever met in my whole life who they're going to make a movie of my life. And am I correct? Superstar, the amazing Rock is the guy that's paying for this and producing this. Dwayne Johnson, the big Hollywood mogul and movie star. Tell us what's happening.
Yes, sir. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is the executive producer of the film, and it's going to be called Unstoppable, the Anthony Robles story. And it's a dream. And every time I say that The Rock is going to make a movie about me, it's still, I can't believe it. I mean, just going back to my humble beginnings of being born missing my leg, these low expectations, finishing last place in the city my first year. if you would have told me back then that someday I would be where I am today, blessed to be able to travel and speak and blessed to have this opportunity to have a movie about my life, I would never have believed it. But it just goes to show you, if you believe in yourself, what hard work and belief can do. And I really see this film as an opportunity to inspire people. And Mr. Weldon, and what you shared, that touches my heart, because that's why I love being a professional speaker. Just that opportunity to impact others, to give back and inspire them through the challenges that they have to wrestle in their life. Because I know my story, right? You know your story, you know your life. And so for me, I've lived through it. My favorite part of my speaking events is afterwards, when I get to interact with people, when I do get to sign things, because I get to talk with them and they open up and share what they're dealing with, the challenges. And if there was a certain part of my speech that touched them. And that is what it's truly all about. It's about helping others, because when I look back at my journey, I mean, I wouldn't be here today without people like Chris, without my wrestling coach, without my mom, without Mr. Weldon, who took the time to help me, to give me just that one little act of kindness to help me over a speed bump in my life, to help me overcome a challenge to reach a goal. And we need that help. We need more people to stand up and look out for others. And that's that act of kindness. And that's what, to me, this movie is all about, is just spreading that message of positivity, of inspiring others, and just showing what's truly possible if you believe in yourself and when others believe in you and help you. And so I can't wait for this movie to come out. With COVID going on right now, things have been put on hold. We were actually getting ready to start filming last summer, but with everything that happened, they had put it on pause. So we're waiting right now. We're waiting for the green light to start filming. I'm actually going to be doing all the wrestling scenes in the movie. So I'll basically be my own stunt double out there, which I'm really excited about. So I'm still training on the wrestling mat. I'm staying in shape for that. But hopefully here soon, it'll be around the corner and we'll be filming and just be able to get this message out. Because from what I've been told, it should be a pretty quick turnaround. They said 8 to 10 weeks to film it. And then from there, it's just a matter of the editing and being able to get it in theaters when there's a good window for it. So I'm being patient. But again, I mean, it's just truly a blessing to me. I couldn't imagine being where I am today and to have this film as a reality. But again, it's not about me. I'm looking at this film as an opportunity to share that message, as a platform to inspire others, because that's truly what it's all about. That's what I've learned through my journey. It's about helping others. And by doing that, you also get something in return. And so I'm just trying to continue that, spreading that love and that positivity and that kindness.
Now, you're not starring in the movie, though, in the parts where you're not wrestling?
No, I'm not. They actually initially asked me if I would be interested in being myself in the film and acting, but I told them that would be pretty weird for a producer to tell me how to act as me in the movie, right? It's like, oh, you need to do this with more emotion. I'm like, no, this is how I would say it. This is how I would do it. So I figured that'd be pretty weird. I just told them, I'm happy to do the wrestling scenes. I know that arena and I'll stay there. So it's been pretty interesting. I know they've picked somebody who's going to play me in the film. I'm not allowed to say who it is just yet, but this individual.
Is it Denzel Washington? No.
I wish. That was my first choice.
I know you've always wanted Denzel. I remember you told me that in a parking lot. I forget what movie, but I said, someday, you're going to make a movie about you. Who would you want to play you? Denzel Washington.
I was pushing hard for Denzel, but
I think he's a little too old.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful, Anthony. Well, to wrap up, what would you say is the most important thing as our listener has absorbed all of these things that you've accomplished, the unstoppable mindset, the doing more than ordinary? What if you could just impart one message to people when you speak or now on this podcast, what would that be?
My message would be that in life, we all have to wrestle a challenge. And that can come in many forms. That can be a physical challenge. That can be something with work. That can be relationships. That can be a mental challenge. We all have a challenge that we have to wrestle. We all have an obstacle that we have to overcome. And to me, that word unstoppable, it doesn't mean you don't face challenges. It doesn't mean you don't doubt sometimes, that you don't face setbacks, that you don't get knocked down, that you don't want to quit. Unstoppable means that in that situation, in that moment when you're wrestling and you feel like you can't go any further, that you can't win this match, you keep fighting, you grind through, you keep pushing, you don't give up on yourself. That's what unstoppable is. Unstoppable means you wrestle to the very end. You don't give up. You focus on what you can do. It's not about what you can't do. It's not about what can hold you back. It's about focusing on those strengths and building on those things. Because if you do that, you will become unstoppable. You already are unstoppable. But if you do that every single day, you'll find that you get closer to those goals. You'll find that you become stronger because you push through those comfort zones that you've built for yourself. You get to the edge and you discover that you can go a lot further than you thought you could initially. And as you do that, you just keep getting stronger. Through it all, you're unstoppable.
Robbie, what would you like to add before I close it?
I like to add I might have needed a tissue box here today, how inspiring you are, Anthony. I greatly appreciate you and everything you've done in your life, because it's like people like you that we need more of in this world. And I think you're one amazing individual. And one question I have for you would be, how much of this, obviously you have good genetics, okay? You don't have genetics that you don't recover well from workouts and all this stuff, right? You obviously have good genetics. You obviously have an amazing mindset as well. What do you think, if you had to put a ratio on how much physical, how much mental, where are we going? We going 99% mental to achieve what you achieve and 1% physical, right? Because you're a world record breaker, right? So tell us that. Tell us, from a guy who is gifted physically, but also has the mind, what percentage is it mental?
I would say, honestly, 90% mental, 10% physical. Because if you look back on my story, high school, I was undersized, 90 pounds. Going into college, the colleges didn't want to recruit me because they didn't see me as a physical specimen. They still saw me as too small. And my strength was something that I had to develop, and that came from up here. Going into the weight room every single day, yeah, that was hard, but it came back to just me being disciplined, me being willing to push through that every single day up here, to challenge myself, because I could have just put on the weight that I knew I could lift every single day, the light stuff, and I could have just been repping that out, but I wouldn't have seen that progress that I needed to excel and get to the level where I needed to be at. And so I would say it all comes back to the mental part of it. And that's what I'm really focused on for this 24-hour pull-up record. Of course, I'm putting a lot of physical stuff into there, the training, but mentally, I know that's what it's going to come down to on the day of. When I'm going for 24 hours straight, when I get to a certain rep, I know physically my body's going to start breaking down. My biceps are going to start to give out. My back's going to tighten up. I'm going to start cramping. My hands are going to hurt. The current record holder, there's pictures of him. He's got 3rd-degree burns on his hands from doing so many reps. I know the physical part's going to hurt, but it's going to come down to the mental part. Am I strong enough up here to be willing to do one more rep? And that's how I'm looking at this record. I'm not looking at 7,700 and whatever. I'm looking at one more rep. I know I can do that. I know I can push one more out. And so every single minute, I am just focused on one rep in front of me. I'm not going to have a giant clock of 24 hours in front of me. I'm not going to have a huge race board saying what number I'm on. One more rep. And I think that's how we need to approach our challenges and our goals in life. It's that mental part of it. I can do one more, right? I can do one more day. I can give one more ounce of effort towards this goal. And that's what it's all about. That's 90% mental, 10% physical for me. It's always been my entire life.
So do you visualize the setback, the difficult, the hurdles, all the things that are going to hit you? That's what it sounded like to me. You visualize that stuff first, and then you visualize yourself breaking through the most difficult obstacle. Would you say that that's a large part of the 90%?
Exactly. It's that visualization and just imagine it. And, I've got it all planned out for this 24 hour. I have certain songs on a playlist that I'm going to be listening to, certain movies that I'll have on the wall going, and certain quotes that I'm going to have taped up in front of me. It's all about just that mental part of it, just feeding my mind to think positively, to fire myself up. And the way I think about it, it's like, it's looking for those sparks. It's like, so you have the fire, right? It's like you have the goal, the dream, and there's the fire, that desire to achieve it. But little by little, as you start wearing down, as the obstacles start getting longer and harder, that fire starts to dwindle. And sometimes it might die out. So you need those sparks, that can reignite that fire. And that's what it is for me, those mental things that'll push me, those sparks.
I think there's one more very important question before we close out today, because the big thing is like people are trying to have balance, right? Balance with work and family and all these things. And you're a smart guy, right? So I'm certain that you don't only push yourself. How do you look at balance? Like, how do you create balance in your training, balance in your life with all these things that you've achieved? Like, how do you look at that? How do you keep yourself from being overtrained, overstressed, right? And and maybe you have a different way of looking at that, which keeps you from even thinking that that's even a possibility.
Well, I know that balance can be tough, but I remember just going back to college, my coach told us something, and he's like, look, when we were when we were college athletes, he said, look, he said, you're a student athlete. He said, in your life right now, there's three things. He's like, it's your social life, it's your school, and it's your sport. He says, you have to prioritize those things. He said, plan it out. What's most important, write it down on the list and write down how you're going to devote your time to all these different things. And so for me in my life, I break it down the same way. I mean, there's so many things going on. I prioritize. And number one, it's always faith. And then it's my family. And then after that, it's everything else. And I just go down the list and say, okay, you know what? These are my priorities right now. I need to make sure that I am sticking to this list. Certain days, yeah, you know what? I might have to do more training than this, or, something's going to have to take precedent. But in the back of my mind, I'm always looking back to that list to make sure I'm prioritizing what's most important in my life. And that's what I'm spending the most time on. And for me, it is always going to be my faith and my family, and everything else it's going to come after that. But, it's a daily battle, right? It's a daily just thing that you have to learn to overcome and just learn to plan out. It's tough, but that's what it takes. And I think that's a great thing to have to deal with, is finding that balance, right? Because if it's like, okay, I'm not going to push myself in anything, then you don't have to worry about finding any balance, because, there's no real level to reach, right? You feel like you already made it. So for me, I'm trying to push in everything. And so balance, prioritize.
Awesome.
Well, as you listen to this, you began this journey with Anthony by me asking you to imagine you're coming over to my house to hear this guy talk. Now I want you to imagine it's also 2011, except it's later in that year. And you're watching television. You're watching the ESPYs, which is the award show for athletes. And in the audience are the greatest athletes in football, basketball, baseball. Every sport is represented. And giving one of the awards is Jay Leno. At that time, The Tonight Show was one of the top-rated shows. He was one of the most visible people in America. And he presented an award to Anthony. Of all of these athletes that year, he was named, and am I correct, the award was the most inspirational?
Well, it was the Jimmy V Award for perseverance.
The Jimmy V. Yes. Oh, Jim Valvano. I can still remember his talk and his last game. But I mean, that was such a highlight. And of course, Jay had to talk to Anthony behind the scenes. And from what I remember, from what you told me, that he really started to like you so much, he invited you on The Tonight Show. And just imagine, now you're watching The Tonight Show, and James Bond is the guest with Anthony. Daniel Craig. Is that right, Anthony?
Yes, sir.
And
that's
before
correct.
Anthony comes out, Jay Leno says to Craig, he said, by the way, be careful when you shake this kid's hand. He's pretty strong. Now he's talking to James Bond. He's talking to Daniel Craig. Daniel Craig reaches for Anthony, gives him a handshake, and he goes, ah! He had James Bond in his hand, crying almost. But that was wonderful. Now, what are you going to do? Maybe you don't want to be on The Tonight Show, but you need to be unstoppable, and you can. So go out and make it a great day.